Oh my God.
All right, give the mic to Bob. Let's start.
I don't want to say what I had on my notes. Maybe I'll come back to that. So when I was in high school, I just wanted to goof off, and I wanted to stay under the radar. I didn't want to get the system's attention, so I could just keep goofing off. But one day, in math class, I got incensed. The teacher wrote on the board, 0 divided by 0 equals what? And I said, it equals 0. Obviously, you started with 0. Doesn't matter what you divide by, it's 0. And she said, nope, it's undefined.
No.
I said, no, it's not undefined. You can't. Mathematics doesn't break because you did a simple operation. I really got insistent, and she got angry at me. And
Challenging authority.
I think it was also because she didn't quite know why it was undefined either. And I'm sitting here identifying with her on that. The problem with saying you know what you are is that of course, it's not in a conceptual realm. And so you're forced into a mistake. But I find myself also coming up with something. I'll use the words, what is? And then if I'm writing it, I'll capitalize the IS. But if I get forced into thinking more about it, I get exhausted. Because you can't do it, and then I keep trying to do it, and I feel like it'd be better to just make up some meaningless sound to use instead. A stupaboo, or what am I? I am the Bestupowitz, or something like that. Or something silly, like ground of beef, or maybe like a Zen like thing. You just go that. Yes. So it's easy to make fun of the knowing what you are position, but the knowing what you're not has the same problem. You can't say that you're not the body. I mean, that's not the correct answer. You can't say you are it either. And you can't say you're all things. And you can't say that you're nothing. So what does this come down to? And I guess for me, it was more useful to look at what I'm not. 1 minute. Because there was something in me that was defining myself. And I could tell that there was a problem with that. And so the faculty, the thing that was making that self, is the same thing that can deconstruct it, that can look at it. You can't look at what you are, but you can look at what you think you are. And for me, that analytical subtractive path gave me a direction. It created energy, a focus, and I was able to, or the path was able to unfold in that direction. And it gave my mind something to work on. And so if you have that kind of mind, that is you're good at decomposing things, you're good at deconstructing, this kind of path, this statement, you know what you are not, is practical. is very useful. It gives you a step immediately to take. It won't get you all the way. It'll break too, but it gives you something to do immediately.
Do we go up? Do we go? We're going in the row. Okay. Can everybody hear me? Am I on? All right. Yes, I struggle with the exact same things that Shawn has outlined. And for me, the knowing what you're not provides a little bit more practical steps to take, a little bit more concrete. And that was a real key in my path. And what you're deconstructing, you're wanting to get to this deconstructing of this idea of who you are, this thought of who you are, this concept that you have in your mind of this, you identify as this person. And when you're able to deconstruct that that's a thought of who I am, it's not actually who I am. And so mine was, I really started at the basics with labels. And so I am not, who do I think I am? I think I'm a good leader. And so I started with, I am not a good leader. And I am not a mother. I am not, I actually have the list here. Well, at one point I got to, I can do nothing. Whoever made me this way will have to do what needs to be done. I am nothing. I can no longer do. Someone else will have to finish this character's life. The character is finished, gives up, kaput, done, gone, stops. Whatever you want done, you will have to do it yourself. I was just talking to the universe. I am not a mother, I am not a gardener, I am not a friend, I am not a body. And I went through, you know, everything the ideas of what I had that I thought I was. And I got down to, for I am the scene, I am the stars and the moon, and the plump, feathery, chirping birds. That is all. I am just these. That is all I will own. And so I think a lot of creating this separate person, it's this separateness that's keeping the whole from manifesting. And a lot of seeking is just reinforcing this separate self, because you're trying to get this self to this other place. Anything that is, you know, reinforcing this separate identity is not going to help deconstruct it. So just trying to, just recognizing it. You don't have to like throw it away or, you know, say this body isn't real. That's not the point. It's deconstructing to realize that this body is not who I am. This body is a character and a role that is played in this play of life, but not the truth of who I am. So I kind of look at it, I think this metaphor has been used before, as an onion. As you're peeling off the layers of these different identities that you carry around, you get to the center, but instead of, you know, the bulb being in the center, pretend there's a diamond, or maybe a sun, or maybe life force, the force from Star Wars, or whatever you want to put in the center. And as you get the layers down, it just naturally is there. It's not something you have to go outside of the onion to find. It's already within. And as you deconstruct, is that my time?
1 minute.
As you deconstruct the layers, then it unfolds naturally. It's not something you have to go searching for. So to me, this path is the path of surrender. That's another good word I'll use. It's making yourself vulnerable. It's allowing what is, that's the word I use all the time too, what is, to manifest. And the more layers you get off, the more you can start to see and realize. So yeah, I have just a couple quotes, and I don't know who's heard of Wu Xin, but I've been lately reading him, so. This isn't the quote, this is, what are we surrendering, letting go, emptying, dissolving, discarding, dismantling, giving up, divesting? There are so many words you can use for this path, but it's really fears, the separate identities fears versus the wholeness moves from love. The separate identity moves from fear. Judgments, thoughts about ourselves, beliefs, labels, ideas, claiming, owning, those are the things that we're giving up. When the noise ceases, silence remains. When thoughts of the past or future stop, the present moment remains. When thinking stops, clarity remains. It is the emptying that allows the silent, clear presence to unfold. So that's Wu Xin.
Wow, what good timing. Oh, I got a lavalier on, yeah. No worries. So it looks to me that what you are is your mission in life. It's your priority. Your priority is you're trying to define what you are in the world, what your place is in the world. And part of that evolves into figuring out who you are, what your identity is. And that's what you're locked onto. Even the spiritual path, even when you've been told about retreating from untruth or following the path of what, discovering what you are not to arrive at whatever is, that path becomes part of defining what you are in the world. So I think I believe every human being's life, their mission is to define what they are and figure out their place in the world. And that becomes all-consuming. It's launched at birth. The toddler, the infant is funneled down this path. It's all automatic. It's all programming. You can't, you don't have any control over it. That's what flows through your consciousness and your sensory apparatus. And by the time you reach the age of reason, you're utterly locked into identity, and it ratchets up big time in adolescence. And then by the time you reach young adulthood, you're really, really faced with the priority of figuring out what is your place in the world, and who are you. So knowing what you are is what you're obsessed with, but you're looking 180 degrees in the wrong direction, and you can't help yourself because that's the innate programming, and the way you're trying to determine what you are is you define it by your relationships with other people. What do you do in the world, and what have you accumulated that can reflect back to you? Like the guy that built this house, he was extremely successful, and he surrounded himself with fancy objects. Some of them look expensive, some of them not so much, but they all reflected back to him his success, and that showed him what he was and what his role in the world was. But I think that calling, it's really life's calling, and it's the desire and the capacity to do that precedes you. It precedes you. And it's what empowers your capacity to even do that. But like I said, you're just, you get launched into this existence facing 180 degrees away from that. So I'm just going to stop there and add on that I feel like that brings you full circle to, if you're going to be successful at on a spiritual path and finding your ultimate absolute nature being, you're going to traverse a process of discovering what you're not. And I tag that process, it's called going within. And going within, you have all these stream of experiences coming. Going within is experienced as a loss of self. And there might be painful spots in that process, and there might be spots where it feels freeing and exhilarating. All of those experiences along the way spin you back out because you're having that experience. And so you just this flame is dancing back and forth on the candle, and at some point there's a preponderance of looking in a certain direction. It's like the wind is starting to move that candle a little bit more to the right than the left, and after a certain amount of moment, something will occur in your life, and it'll just be the trigger point, the tripwire. That's the last step of going within. And you have to have that wind, because otherwise you would spin it out as an experience before that last, what you're not, can fall away. So that's how it looks to me. And that was my experience, and very clearly in hindsight. Yeah, like Anima says. So, yeah.
I agree with everything he said. The theme of this retreat is going home, but there's really no going or coming in this. Everybody's always at home. This is home. There's nothing other than this. I just happen to use the word this, where other people might use the word the absolute, or the self, or the infinite, or God, and they have various connotations. Sargadatta once told a seeker, "You are the absolute, but you imagine trees and clouds." Ramana Maharshi once told a seeker, using slightly different words, "All there is the self. You must stop imagining things and realize that all is the self." All duality exists in imagination. All separation is imaginary. All thingness is imaginary. All there is this. It's undivided, complete, whole, infinite, mysterious, loving. I could go on and on with various synonyms for that. I ask people a lot of times, how do you grow your bones and teeth? How do you grow your hair, your skin? Nobody knows. The human heart beats 100,000 times a day. A 70-year-old person has pumped enough blood to fill up 3 super tankers. All this is happening automatically. What do you have to do with all that? The blood cells that move through the body know exactly where to go, know exactly what to do. There's no intellect involved as far as we know. There may be awareness, but there's no intellectual reflection about that. And I used to sit in a chair at night, and I would look at the back of my hands, at the blood veins in the back of my hands, and I would think, I have nothing to do with what's happening here. So why do I think that I'm separate in any way from this? And I would do all kind of experiments, thought experiments along that line. This is actual. You can imagine that it's a hand. But it's just this. It's what everybody is here. And if somebody conventionally asked me, who are you? I'd say, oh, people call me Bob. But if somebody here asked me, who are you really? I would have to say, I am what asked that question. Because there's only one thingless thing here. It's what's talking and it's what's listening in all of these different forms. There's no separation whatsoever except in imagination. So as we learn not to think, and it's not difficult to learn not to think because it's just a habit. And I once was on a Zoom talk with Tyler, and I told people 95% of all your thinking is totally unnecessary. If there's no thinking at all, you will continue to function intelligently and functionally because what you are is this vast intelligence manifesting. And only thinking makes it seem otherwise. It's a lot like learning to speed read. All you really have to do is just keep shifting attention away from thoughts. And Nisargadatta once told a seeker, if you want to find the truth, if you want to find the absolute, simply go beyond the mind. How do you go beyond the mind? If you're just looking, that's beyond the mind. Nobody knows how they see. Nobody knows how they think. All right? But you do think. This thinks. If you reach up and scratch an itch, that's this scratching. This is itch. There's nothing separate here. All separation is totally imaginary. And when you discover what you are, the result is peace, acceptance, a living in the present moment, no interest in the past or the future. There's joy, there's love, there's connectivity. You're one with what is. So knowing what you are, without any doubt whatsoever, seems to me incredibly important. And anybody can discover this. Everybody here is always one with this. No separation at all. And for some people who imagine a little guy in the head or a little girl in the head looking out of the body and so forth, that can completely fall away. I discovered that as the mind became more silent, various realizations and insights just spontaneously occurred. All we can really say is that those sort of things happen by grace because it's not something that we, who we think we are, do. It just happens. But as one shifts attention away from thoughts, things become clearer and clearer. And when the mind becomes really silent, it becomes really obvious. I can think of all kind of people from Gary Weber to Terry Stevens, and there's a whole list of people who, for one reason or another, their mind just suddenly stopped. And as a result of that, they woke up. So thinking divides. But in silence, we realize that all of this is unified. It's a unified, living, infinite field of being, and there's nothing separate in it. There's no Bob, Carol, John, Bill, Dick, Tom, or Harry in this. There's just this, looking at itself, interacting with itself. It's whole and complete. So it's what everybody here is already. Everybody is already home. This is home. You're always doing exactly what you must be doing because it's not who you think you are that's doing any of this. It's what you actually are. This is actual. Hand is imaginary. I many times ask people, can you show me the boundary between hand, wrist, and arm, or fingers, hand, wrist, and arm? And I'll give them a magic marker. And then they'll hesitate. And if they really take this seriously, they'll realize that the idea that there's a boundary separating a hand from a wrist or a wrist from an arm is like lines of longitude or latitude. They're all imaginary. There's no boundary anywhere. But the intellect divides what it sees and imagines separateness, and there simply isn't any. And so the primary goal of this particular path is to discover what you are. And what you are is this manifesting just like this.
Thank you, Bob. Now we open for the audience Q&A. Anima?
So Bob, just like, we don't have control over our heart, blood pumping. So you think human beings have control over what they're imagining, their imagination, the thoughts? Having thoughts and no thoughts. So isn't it like the other side of, isn't it part of duality, the mind realm?
There's no duality at all.
Use the mic.
All there is this. There's no division. If a thought occurs, this is thinking the thought.
But what I got from you is that thought is the problem. It's the thought is what is keeping you away from isness or home. This is home, but the thought is making you feel that you're not home.
That's right.
So is all thought a problem?
There's really nothing wrong with thinking, all right? But thinking obscures the obvious. In other words, when we think and imagine and we see all this, and we've already, as adults, internalized millions of distinctions, and they're all internalized in the subconscious. Only people who have learned not to think or who have a very silent mind realize that you can go to the grocery store and buy groceries and pump gas, not a single thought. It's unnecessary. The thought is like an overlay. It's like an artificial meta-reality that's created by the intellect. And that's what the intellect does. And it happens so gradually that people don't realize it. And there's a great parable that Jesus talks about in the Gospel of Thomas, where he talks about a woman who has buys a big jar of meal, and she's carrying it on her shoulder at home, and it springs a leak, but she doesn't realize it. And all the meal gradually spills out on the ground behind her. And she gets back to her house, and she sets it down, and she's astonished to discover it's empty, because what happened was so gradual, she never realized what was happening. And essentially, that's what Bob's talking about. We're conditioned to gradually make all these distinctions and divide the world up into all these categories and so forth. And it happens so gradually we don't realize what's happened. So in a sense, we're reversing that trajectory. All right, we're reversing what got us into this mess. And this Argonaut actually called it that one time. He was talking to some guy, and he said, "You didn't get into this mess overnight." He was a real feisty little guy. No, you didn't. It was very gradual. It was so gradual you didn't realize what was happening. All right? And so what we're doing when we begin to slow down thoughts and allow the silence to take over, we begin to realize, we begin to have all these insights. We begin to realize, and a realization is a realization of what's not true. And each realization informs the mind. The mind is the last to know on this path. So like when we, say, have a cosmic consciousness experience, we realize, reality is not what I thought it was, all right? But that informs the mind. The mind then knows reality is not what I thought it was. If you see through the illusion of selfhood, you realize, I'm not who I thought I was, But when you realize that you're not who you thought you were, almost simultaneously, you realize what is going on. You realize that reality, with a capital R, this, the absolute, is doing everything. And that's why one very helpful thing that I found along the way at a certain point, and I wrote about this in my book, I was fantasizing about running off to a wilderness. I thought, if I could just be alone in the wilderness for a month or two, I could really go deep, and that became a really powerful fantasy. And, one day I was pouring concrete, and that same thought occurred. If I didn't have to be pouring this stupid concrete, I could be off there getting enlightened in the wilderness. And all of a sudden, bam, I saw how that thought separated me from the truth of what is. And I asked myself this really simple question, and I ask people this all the time after I explain it. I asked myself, what must I be doing this moment? It was 100% clear. I had to be pouring concrete. So I asked people, what must you be doing this moment? You got to be sitting here listening to these characters speak, right? What have I got to be doing? I got to be sitting here talking on a microphone.
So, Bob, does that, like stopping thought or if the thoughts stop, would that resolve the identity crisis, or that inner angst of if somebody came to you and asked you, what should I do, Bob? I have this inner anxiety and separation, and so what would you tell them?
Yeah, essentially, I like to tell people, shift your attention away from those thoughts. That kind of mind talk is just like a labyrinth. There's no end to it.
I'd like to ask the other three also, what
I want to say it depends on which thought, because if you want to use that, you could attach that word. I could attach that word to the last shoe that dropped when I was reading Pullian's letter, because I had this thought, this idea that came from the experience of being the experiencer. I say that your sense of self is your most immediate experience, and it is being watched. It is within awareness. I want to ask Bob, is it possible to practice ATA minus T on thought?
That's actually what I call ATA plus T. All right?
Okay.
In other words, somebody challenged me about that on the internet one time, and I hadn't really thought. Somebody said, well, aren't thoughts actual? I went, yeah, I guess they are. So then I had to change. I used to just use ATA. And then I realized, oh, okay, ATA minus T.
Okay.
All right.
Can you practice ATA minus T on the self? And what we take to be ourself, not like, you always give examples of looking at a tree or whatever, but so external objects. So is it possible to practice ATA minus T on the self?
Well, you could try that, but again, the self is a concept, all right? And so in my mind, that's more like ATA plus T.
Okay.
All right? And so, and I'm not, again, after realizing what was going on and my search came to an end, it was about 2 years later. I had practiced ATA minus T so long that I was continuing to do it. And then one day I realized, this is what thinks the thought, so it doesn't really matter whether it's thinking or not thinking. But in silence, it seemed to me that all of the major realizations came out of silence in my case.
So you do have to go through a period of time to practice AT&T and then realization. Right?
Some people. No, everybody's path is really different. But I do know there are several examples of people. I mean, there are people like Paul Morgan Summers just kicking a soccer ball around, all of a sudden, boom. That happens. It's really rare. There are Ramana Maharshi stories, and those are really rare.
How about you, Jenny and Shawn?
Well, if somebody asked me that question, for me, it's very similar to what Bob said in terms of, is this a hand? No. Coming back to just this moment and what is happening in this moment. Because everything else is in the imagination or is in thought. So if you're angsting in thought, then coming back to, okay, I feel this chair, I feel my feet on the floor, something's talking. Just like Bob, it's not me, it's what's supposed to be happening. And so continuing to narrow it down to the simplest thing, because we make everything so complex. The mind adds complexity, and really reality is very, very simple. It's the most ordinary, without all the excess and the thinking. And attending to this moment, it's redirecting the attention.
That's right. And the other thing I always love to tell people is you can't make a mistake, because who you think you are isn't what's doing this. And this just doesn't make a mistake. It unfolds however it unfolds.
So, Bob, sorry to interrupt. Yeah, Mr. Rose advised that, you'll have ample of time in your grave to meditate. Right now, do some productive thinking, efficient, like really. His path teaches you to think for yourself. encourages you to think for yourself. So what do you I wonder if, for me, that worked.
Yeah, and like I say, everybody's path is unique. The way this unfolds in each individual life is really unusual and unique.
I have a comment to say about this. So I think when Rose advised productive thinking, in hindsight, I take it to mean that it doesn't mean he wants you to sit down and look at anything and then analyze it to death. The idea was productive thinking leads, and that's why I asked the question about ATA minus T, because I think at some point you are attending to the actual. Like, okay, stop participating in that movie. Stop trying to analyze it and rationalize it. See what's actually occurring inside of you. And I think, when I think back on my meditations, and I've heard you talk about this ATA stuff long enough, and I realized, I can kind of bridge that. I could see that that's happened in my meditations to some degree. You don't have much control over thought. You can try to do this, and it can last for maybe very short intervals. But what you're doing is you're setting a momentum of the attention in a specific direction. I call it the inward vector of the attention. Mm-hmm. And that's what's important. It doesn't matter what you're thinking or when you're not thinking or are thinking, there's something invisible happening, and it's the attention building momentum in a direction inward. So that's removing all the distractions, and when you're not looking at anything out there, something is looking at itself and is eternal.
Shawn, how about you? What would you say to a seeker who comes to you? Shawn, please help me. Is thought a problem?
So I think what my reaction would be is to listen to what how do they express that problem? I like to talk in terms of there's a signal. Something's presenting itself to you. So I would ask them, how is that presenting it? What part?
Is thinking a problem?
Oh, is thought a problem? If they ask me that, if thought is a problem.
She's asking that.
Oh, you're asking that. Oh, my response would be, do you think it's a problem? Because that's what's arising. You're thinking, maybe I shouldn't be thinking. And so that would be the starting point, is to ask, what is your relationship with thought? Can we look closer at this? This is the signal. This is what's coming up. This is what you need to put your attention on. And then I would try to help facilitate some, if I can, some deepening into that. What else is coming up when you look at thought? Is it some of the thoughts? Is it all thoughts? Is there a feeling actually behind this? Are you tired and you want to stop thinking? I would have to have them tell me, and so that we could follow that down. As for myself, I'm a heavy thinker. It's wide open all the time, pretty much. And so I like to say I had to make friends with thought. So other people say, nope. You got to get rid of that thought. That's the key problem.
So what is the source of thought?
What a silly question.
It just keeps coming. I don't control it.
Everything keeps coming.
Where does it come from?
Where everything else comes from, right? Everything keeps coming. Also, the idea that stuff keeps coming keeps coming. The time itself is also an idea. The feeling that it's been coming, that's a feeling.
So how do I find that source?
Find the source?
Source of thought, whatever keeps coming. What is the source of that?
Well, the only thing you can do is look at it. If it's presenting you and you're saying, oh, there's something there about thought that confuses me, then you put your attention on it. And then something else will come up. Bob's going nuts here.
Productive thinking is not the only thing Rose advised. I mean, the meditation paper talks about 4 or 5 levels of meditation, and I would say productive thinking is level 1. He talked about going within, and I think productive thinking is more important when you're getting your house in order, and when you're starting your path, and for the first time you're discovering how, oh my God, I rationalize stuff. I think things after the fact that harmonizes with the facts on the ground, take credit for it, and then when necessary I spin things so I can kind of tweak the outcome in the direction of what I want. So, so I have the ability to delude myself. Oh, I need to start looking at that. So maybe that's productive thinking, but that runs its course. And the important to me, in hindsight, and I think this is a true statement generically, the important part of that kind of meditation is when it runs out of gas and now you're still staring at something in a certain direction. And Rose said like the 3rd or 4th level is go within, use whatever means are necessary. I think what I just described is when you stop being engaged in the thought, now the attention is what I recall in Patanjali's stages of meditation was this 3rd and final. There was 3 phases: concentrate, think of one thing, focus, and then think of everything about that thing, and then contemplation. That's when you stop thinking and I experienced that in my meditations. I would do exactly what Rose advised, and then it would run out of gas, and then I felt like I was really in a special place. I think Bob might say, well, you were in samadhi, some stage of samadhi. I don't know. It never occurred to me.
Contemplation, you contemplate, you read something or you realize something. Isn't that also, that's thought, right?
But
Contemplation.
But you said, pardon me, I got to jump back. You kept asking over and over, well, where's it coming? Where's it coming from? Thought comes from the body. Mike Connors, I agree with this statement now. The brain makes thoughts like the kidneys make urine. The machinery just is constantly churning out thoughts. It's like somebody pokes me in the rib. I have a thought, and then the next thought is, why did you do that? And then the next thought is, I'm going to get back.
I didn't poke you.
Oh. Well, that's another aspect. I could have swore you did. I had a pain in the side, and I didn't poke myself, so you must have poked me.
I mean, asking what is the source of thought, to me, is asking what is the source of the sun, or the moon, or the stars. There's no need to have an answer to that question.
So Mr. Rose also said, if you know the source of, I don't know, of this thought, he didn't say thought, I would know the essence of everything. I will know my own essence.
Yes, but it's the recognition of what you are not that brings your own essence out.
Maybe.
And so it's not getting rid of thought, it's recognizing that that's not who you truly are. It's not identifying and claiming and owning it. That's my thought. It's just thought coming through. It's not my thought. We claim everything, and that's what reinforces our identity of a separate self. And so if we allow thoughts, we can put our attention, we can direct our attention. But I mean, my question is, I watched my granddaughter. I moved here when my granddaughter was born, and she's 13 years old now. And it just happens. There's nothing that anybody can do to keep her from growing up and becoming, middle school.
Thank you. No more. Yeah, sorry, time.
Shawn wants to ask a question. Please let him.
I would like to know the sense of self. If you all consider the sense of self to be a thought or feel, like what is that? When I strip away thought, like okay, there's thought, there's these emotions, let's call them emotions, things bubble up. There's still some thing that's me. Is that like
Yes.
a product of the body in your mind, or is it another thought?
On this side of the, it's an experience. On behind it is the side that empowers it, in which it occurs. I mean, it's the
Animating force.
the light in the jack-o'-lantern. You know, not the candle, but the invisible light that you can't actually see light, but it's there, and it casts a shadow on the pumpkin, on the jack-o'-lantern, and that jack-o'-lantern has a sense of self, not because of a power that doesn't belong to the jack-o'-lantern. It's like, you know, the form becomes enlivened. That's how I see it. So the sense of self, and the most immediate level that people have, like, yeah, I feel I'm aware that I exist. Ultimately, it's an experience that depends on the body. Have you ever had general anesthesia? You don't have any sense of self. There's no experience. There's nothing to. But I've had the experience of coming out of mild anesthesia, you know, for an outpatient procedure, and I felt like I looked at the, you know, back in the feeling. I could see that awareness never ceased. It's just that I don't know how was that? How could that be possible? Because Bob Cergol, I don't remember being conscious as Bob Cergol, but it was back that aliveness that is just in which everything is contained, that I am able to experience consciously. You know, I can't do it on a dime, but I can withdraw my attention from all the distractions, and that's what's in the background. It's like, oh, this is like some kind of wallpaper. If I could just peel it, you could just peel it away, then there'd be this vast, empty. Awareness is too limiting, but.
Well, I was just going to, last night I happened to mention this from talking to people. It's been fascinating to me to find out that the sense of self varies from individual to individual. Some people have what I call a hardcore sense of selfhood, and it feels like a little person in the head looking out at the world, all right? A lot of people don't have that. I think that it's associated with strongly identifying with various interests and so forth. And it becomes really, it feels visceral. It feels like I am really in here looking at a world out there, all right? At least that's the way it was for myself. What's fascinating is a lot of people don't have that same sense of selfhood. Some people's sense of selfhood is really diffuse, or they don't really have a clear sense of selfhood, either because they didn't strongly identify perhaps, or one thing or another like that. The good news is that brain scientists who do these dynamic brain scans have discovered there's something called the default mode neural network. And there appears to be a circuit in the brain that when you think self-referentially, it lights up. All right? People who have become enlightened, it doesn't light up. In other words, that self-referential network is gone. And all I can tell you is on a particular day at a particular moment, I looked inside and it was gone. The total sense of self that I'd always had, Bob in here making things happen. And of course, I tell this funny story. My wife did not understand this because she didn't have a hardcore sense of selfhood. So she never really got the little guy in the head thing. And I would say, yeah, this little guy in the head's is really a demon to deal with, right? All right. And so only when she saw the movie Men in Black, and the little head opens up and there's a little guy in there pulling levers, she said, now I understand.
So did
I understand what that's like. But that can just vanish. And it's like what I'm fascinated by and would love to know more about are the people who don't have that hardcore sense of selfhood. What happens to the sense of selfhood?
The guy's drunk inside there.
Yeah, so it is different for different people, that visceral sense, but it can totally vanish. And that's the good news.
Have you taken the test?
What test?
The test that you see if that switches on. Yeah. Finally, we have a concrete yardstick. We could really determine if we know what we're talking about.
Okay, so remind me your question.
Sense of self.
My question, and just to play off Bob, I wasn't limiting it to I get what you're saying. Because for a long time of course I'm this thinking machine, but with enough spiritual work and experiences, I realized that that's all kind of stuff going on, yet, you know, in the middle of the night, like, here I am, I exist, and that's the sense. What do you consider that sense of, I'm here, I'm an individual, or maybe I feel, if I'm with someone, like I feel like I'm very connected to them, but I'm still I. Do you consider that to be another thought, or was that a mechanism of the body? What the heck is that?
To me, what you're describing is the sense of the big S self. And I don't consider that a thought. I consider that I am, and I exist, and that is enough. That validates everything that I do. And so the experience afterwards of having that small self be obliterated is that it, as you're living life, it continues to jump into the front seat. Or maybe a better description is when you're on stage, your character needs to play that role. It's a different role when I'm with my grandchildren than when I'm running a business. You show up differently in every different situation. This character's playing a role right now is sitting here on a panel, and it'll play a role driving home and shortly. And so, but that is not permanent. That's all the impermanent things that just move through you. But nothing can obliterate the actual I amness through all of that. So I don't know if that's what you're describing, but that's what my experience is. That grounded awareness, I amness, I call it life. Just, I am life. And everything else is just small stuff going on. Backseat, which is necessary. I mean, I'm not trying to get rid of it. I'm just trying to have it just moves through me. Does that make sense?
Just me.
I hear you. Just from my own experience, though, I have a mind that wants to know, where is that coming from?
Yeah, I don't have that question.
Where?
Okay, so that jack-o'-lantern, who's an animated, bounded awareness, awareness and bounded in form, distracted by all this experience. He goes to sleep at night, and all that experience goes. The awareness is not manifesting as bounded awareness. I'm using the analogy you gave. So you wake up in the middle of the night. There's not a fire hose of experience coming back in, but it's this jack-o'-lantern. Now he's kind of really relaxed and chilled out, and it's like, yeah, I'm aware of being a form, but boy, I can somehow sense this light that's behind me and containing me. So he's got one leg in both sides, on both sides, so to speak. And because to me, you're not separate. I mean, the power for you to be aware, to have that side is, yeah, but I have this sense of being aware as being. That power that you're doing that from doesn't belong to you. It precedes you. So you're simultaneously in that moment of sleep. That's a great example, actually. The sleep, because you disappear in sleep unless you're having dreams, or unless you wake up before you're fully awake. That capacity to be aware is not separate from you, but when it's bounded in form and the identity starts to creep in, there's some overlap, and then you lose yourself completely during the day. But you can, That's why it's even possible for someone to meditate and go within. Human beings have the capacity to discover what they are and go within, because they're using the power of what they are to look. I'll stop there because I'll be in a loop.
So looking at the I am was a large part of my path, and that's because I wanted to know what I am. And someone suggested that there is this I amness, and it took me a while to actually find it, to locate it. You know, what is this thing that's me? And at first I felt like it was like a ball behind my eyes. That was a location. But over my practice, I kept staring at it, and it kept kind of evaporating off characteristics. The characteristic location left, and then the thoughts and emotional things kind of left. And toward the end, it seemed to be not a thought. I could not call it a thought. It almost wasn't even a feeling. It was sort of a subtle knowing. But I think a feeling probably would be the better way that I would say it, is it was locatable. I could get to it and use it as an anchor, as an object of meditation, and stare at it and stabilize it. So it was very subtle for me, but I think feeling would be what I would use, not thought.
And for you, is a feeling another thing that is occurring, like the quality of a feeling versus the quality of a thought? There's some difference for you between those two?
Yeah, so conceptually I would just say there's experiences happening, and we can label those experiences as being thoughts or feelings, and then what I was experiencing was there was an experience of I am that I called the I am, and that I could feel that seemed to me to be the mystery, the core of the problem for me, and I needed to stare at that to see what it would reveal. And as I was staring at it, I could see then that it was not continuous. It was coming and going. And so I could see that it couldn't be me because I was looking at it. And so it just keeps staring at that feeling, and it kept revealing more to me until it kind of reached some equilibrium. And then I moved on to another stage in the path. But it was an object, an experience that could serve as an anchor for meditation.
What generates thoughts? What directs thoughts? It's desires, and and then reactions. Some physical need arises, and a thought pops in your head. And that's how you see you get hungry, and so out of nowhere you think, I'm getting hungry. I think it's time to go have a cookie or a cup of coffee. And then in the experiences along the way, you react, and there's more thoughts. And then the fear of not being able to get that cookie generates another thought. So to me, the thoughts are wholly, you don't generate them. There's a stream of thought happening, and it's all reactive, and it's a manifestation. Well, it's both reactive, but the seed of it is from desires, and fear is just the other side of that coin. Mr. Rose talked about one guru. He met a Kirpal Singh somebody. He told the story a few times, and he admired the person. He thought highly of him. I don't remember the details, but he had the chance to. I think I'm getting this story right. Maybe it's something you read. My memories are getting more muddled as I age. But he asked the guy a question about, well, what's your system? You always want to know what other people's teachings and methods were. And the guy answered me, he said, all that man can do is desire. It's the only thing they can do is desire. Well, guess what? That's your root desire is to be. I mean, to go home. I mean, I think that the desire to define yourself comes from your source, because the source is kind of like it's split. It's like it held up a mirror, and then the reflection was the cosmos, and that whole cosmos is alive because there's no separation, and everything in it wants to return home, kind of like globules of mercury in a, want to get close and snap back in and merge with oneness. So. And we're just sitting along in the arc of our life. We're just watching. We're strapped in the chair, going along for the ride. But we're so identified with the character in the dream or on the movie screen that we're lost in experience. And part of us knows it. And I don't think. I guess you pointed out that not everybody has the same sense of self. I tend to think that, my experiences in life, I extrapolate, well, I guess that's how everybody is and sees it. I think we all do that. But, in my youth and very young age, anything that, any experience that troubled me in any sort of way made me silent. But I never got silent at a birthday party. When I was being showered with presents and praise, I was very noisy, both out, inside. So if people that are not on a spiritual path don't know what that is, they're devout Catholics or whatever. They go through life, and for a good many of them, I think vast majority of them. Something that's, a fear kicks in. I'm not going to get that cookie, or I didn't get that cookie, or it makes them quiet inside. But then they don't want to go there. There's too many distractions, and because that direction conflicts with all this onion layers of desires upon desires upon desires. So they just turn away from that. They don't choose to do that. That's just the momentum of their this bounded awareness. It's what it does.
I was going to ask, what is the body's role in the sense of self, or what is the body's role for a seeker? Or we don't often talk about that at TAD, so it came up in our group session last night, so I wanted to pass along the question.
The body's role is to carry the infinite along. It's to have a little vehicle where the animating source, the great loving intelligence, can move through and play with.
And how, when you were seeking, what role does that play in your sense of self or sense of I am?
Huge, huge role. A separate self, the small self. I was the body. Anything going on with the body was what was happening to me. And I deal with a chronic illness, a daily spinal inflammatory disease, which I have to manage very carefully on a daily basis. And I think that helped a lot in me being able to say, I am not the body, because I really got to see what the body can do that you have no control over. And so just the body's going to do what the body's going to do, what the infinite source moves through it. And you're along for the ride. You're going to either flow with the river or, get all riled up and get stuck in behind the rocks and the eddies and not flow.
I was going to say something about Phil's question. I did examining the body, scanning the body, and I seemed to notice that it felt like the feelings were from the body. So to see feelings, I had to see the body first. So scanning the body and experiencing the body in its fullness seemed to open me up to feelings much more.
I think the body generates the sense of the identity. You know, there's a, now it sounds like I'm talking about a sense of self and now an identity, but the ego comes after the sense of self. You have a sense of existing, you have a sense of being alive as I am. But who am I? That's what I started with saying, well, that's your lifelong project, is to define that who am I, and you build an identity. You literally build an identity, but it's riding on the back of the stream of experience, which is all the body sensory machinery. And the mental machinery, the mind, is at all times one with that. It's one with the body. No, it's on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this thing on?
Yeah.
Okay. I was just going to say that I don't really know what happens for folks who have a diffuse sense of selfhood and how that dissipates and so forth. But from someone who had a hardcore sense of selfhood, the little guy in the head never came back. The sense of me, the past sense of me never came back. It's like the center just fell away. So it's sort of like, I almost feel like they need to have another word for those brain scans, a unified neural circuit or something like that. Because when there's just a sense of being one with what is, life is just really simple. It just flows. And you just do one thing that needs to be done, then you do the next thing that needs to be done. And you really aren't concerned about the future. You're really not worried about anything. It's just, life is really simple. Mm-hmm. I think that's what you were pointing to a minute ago. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yesterday on the porch, Bob, you had mentioned in your path you had very energetic things happening in your body. How did, do you have any more to say as to what that was?
No, I really don't. You know, I've talked to an awful lot of people on this path, and all kinds of unusual stuff happens. Really, really unusual stuff. You know, I know somebody right now who's, as soon as he starts to meditate, his body begins to shake. And he's like forced over. It's hard to describe. He sort of illustrated that one night on a Zoom meeting. And the body responds in really strange ways because we're really a complex organism. So it's really quite mysterious how some of that stuff happens.
It's the body saying, "Don't leave me behind."
I was curious to ask a question of the questioner here, whether you had any different take on the question from what you asked the panelists.
Would I answer my own question?
Yeah.
You're trying to insert me into the panel?
Yeah. Yes, I am actually. I would just be curious if you felt your own answer to that question was covered by what someone spoke to or not, or whether you have a different perspective on the question you raised.
I'm just trying to flesh out, because as Bob Harwood is saying, there's all these different experiences, and for me that was a core conundrum of, yeah, there's thought, yeah, there's feeling, and all. Okay, I can put that aside. I can attend to the actual to a degree, but there's always this darn sense of I am, and it's scared because it wants to be, and I hear people talking about, you know, enlightenment is death of self and these sorts of things, and we're backing away, and yet I have this very core part of self, and I just really want to flesh out, like for you all, what do you think that is, and how does that relate to thought or feeling, or is that like
Didn't you ask me that question already? I thought I gave my answer.
Well, you just asked me why did I
No,
ask
he
the
asked
question.
you to, he asked you to answer your own question.
Well, that was a roundabout way of saying that there's no, I don't need to put flowers on the petal, right? You don't need to hear, because I heard a variety of intriguing answers to that question that I think touch upon a lot of possibilities of how people are facing that.
Thanks, Shawn. I didn't want to put you on the spot, but that was great context for your question. I appreciate it.
Honestly, I'm weary of thinking, trying to articulate stuff. What happened to me is I had this realization, and then I'm supposed to start talking about it right away because of, you know, the tat culture and how I was raised on these areas by Rose, and so I'm you know, I'm at a point actually where I really want to stop talking about it. I don't mean at this meeting right now, but you know, I don't know that I feel like I'm at a point where, you know, I want to like clear the decks of the verbiage I've been using for 20 years now, and you know, I'm working on a book, and that's been a big help, but it's really difficult and hard going because I feel like I'm there's a bit of a fighting going on. It's like I don't want to like regurgitate and repeat this old language, but it's become almost rote. And I'm going down a different path, and it's so I kind of need to stop at one, and so I can really focus on the others, how it's come, you know, how it feels to me right now.
Yeah, I really have no desire to talk about this stuff. And I come, and I drove an hour to get here this morning because I was asked, you know, and so I was called to come. And the realization for me was that I am not this separate self, that really it's just a blank slate. And so if I could, what would I fill that blank slate with? Love. I would fill it with love. And so if people ask me, you know, who's your God or whatever, great, great love, that's who I pray to. Dear great, great love. That's what it feels like to me, and that's what I feel like anything I can do in the service of love, if I'm capable of doing it, I'll do it. And so it's just really simple. Otherwise, I just have no desire. My only desire is to just see what the moment brings. Yeah.
My question is, as a seeker, can you, any one of you or all of you, talk about the practical implications of, which is, I think, a different approach from what the conversation has been up to this point. You know, I mean, it's not that it's not...
Practical implications of?
Well, I don't, maybe it's just overload, but I don't feel like a lot of what the conversation has been that I can relate to.
Exactly. That's why it's like, you know, Rose didn't engage in these kind of conversations hardly ever.
That there are very, very few questions from seekers, you know, because it's the finders who get what you're talking about and can engage in conversation about this and ask you questions that, that might seem like there's, something to be revealed about that from your perspective, and maybe there is, but it's kind of overwhelming for me.
Yeah, I think Shawn did a really good job on these panels of turning it back on. It's like, well, turning the question back on the questioner.
Well, what is your question, Mark?
Well, then my question would be, to kind of link it up to what has been said so far, is, Bob, whenever you mentioned the idea that there's an overlap of what, whenever that jack-o'-lantern is relaxed. And so in that overlap seems to be the potential for making a connection for, what that overlap is and how does it relate to what I can do.
Well, okay, there was at least three questions in there, overlap is maybe not the best word. It implies a boundary line with, it's like both coexist in the same space. But I thought the language that I used in the last TAP meeting was pretty good in that regard. I had a couple of readings, and one of the readings was, started with maybe what some people might think is a laughable question, but it's, how do you know you're alive? And I went through a series of things. Well, think about it. For you to know you're alive, you have to be, you're witnessing. Something is witnessing something, and that something would have to be as outside of you as it was inside of you to know. That's why I wrote it up. Anyway, so I'm not going to try to generate new language here and now to go down that route, but the last question about what does it mean you can do, that's all I've been talking about all these years. And what you can do is develop this inward vector of the attention. And how do you do that? Well, it's like, well, what are you looking at? You're always looking externally. So how do you turn that looking around to go within and can you sit down in a chair and say, follow the I am. Where is that I am coming from? Yeah, maybe you can try to do that. I think it's impossible. I think that to do it volitionally, I think the only way it can be done is obliquely. And the oblique way is the natural way that life throws at you anyway. Because anything that makes you quiet, which is usually troublesome things, don't look away from those things. Develop a daily habit of asking yourself questions and looking at yourself, looking at how do you live your life? What do you do? Why do you do it? And it seems, weary, dreary, back and forth, thinking about stuff, but that's not the important part. The important part is that by doing that, you're doing the who am I, follow the I am meditation in the only way I think it's possible. I mean, I could be wrong on the details. Part of this, my objective with this book is I realized I've been saying the same thing for 20 years. And, over recent years, I realized nobody gets what I'm saying. I need to get really specific and get into examples and, draw out a storyline in a movie. And that's what I'm trying to do in this book. And I'm using a presentation I made years ago as the starting point, the arc of life. And the theme of that meeting was the story of your life. So there is a theme to life, but then there's a series of themes to an individual life. So there's stages in an individual life. Each has its own storyline. There's a bigger story to that overarching arc, and there's a grand theme. And that's kind of what I'm trying to write about. But the arc of the life thing, I'm trying to force myself to really drill into the details of how this individuality is living and moving through this arc of life. And so that's why I've been repeating myself for all these years, and it's not helping anybody. I don't know.
Is there something in what he just said right now that you are like, oh, I want to drill into that? Is it satisfying at all? Or are you still like...
Yeah, it was. Because I was thinking of something that you wrote, that I just read recently. I can't even remember the name of it. But it was a repetition of the first part of what you just said. Which I know isn't of any help to anybody else. But it was to me.
I got a question for Janie. So you mentioned about the layering and the onion, and the peeling of the onion. So if you're looking back on your path, can you see that peeling of the onion? I mean, can you definitively see how that transpired over the trajectory of your search, and how did that show up for you?
Yes, I don't know if in detail, like this layer fell, now this layer fell, but there was definitely a period of 3 years. Journaling helped a lot, but it was really looking at if anything was upsetting to me, that meant that it was a threat to my imagined identity. So what is the imagined identity that is in this picture right now that's causing this upset? And I would journal about it until I got to, that isn't, really who I am. That's just who I think I am. And so, yes, it was a long process. And sometimes a layer would come off and then it would be back on. And it's not like afterwards there's just no layers. It's that the realization of who you truly are overrides all of those layers. So you realize that those layers are necessary for navigating in this world, and you allow your natural, personality to function in the world. And I really saw that I can still do work. I went to visit my family in California this past week, and I didn't even think about the timing of the visit was 3 days before the election, and they're all staunch far-right Republicans. And I'm like, okay, I'm really getting triggered here. So what is my identity that is getting triggered? And it was another opportunity to look at, okay, there's something that's upsetting or triggering me. So that's threatening my identity in some way, my imagined identity. And so I don't know that what gets complete with the waking up is never doubting your true nature and knowing who you really are. But the living of it afterwards, every moment, you can't put the timeless into a time-based, illusion. And we try and do that. We try and take this that can't be described, that's timeless, and fit it into our bodies or fit it into the future's going to look like this. And so every moment is an opportunity in the living of it to look at what imagined structures and identity are being built, or again. Because for me, it's almost like being reborn, a rebirth. And I know that in Christian circles they call it that, and I don't mean it to be in that way. But you kind of like start with a blank slate, like if you were an infant again. And so there is some rebuilding that goes on just to be able to continue to, navigate in the world. Does that answer your question? So it's constantly...
I guess I was trying to get at more like the actual when you talk about layers and peeling away from the onion, like, can you see that there's definitive things that peeled away on the path as you went along? Like,
Yes,
is
I mean,
it is a
there were-
progressive thing, or did it just kind of like, it's just a
No,
cathartic thing that happened all at once?
it was a progressive thing, yeah. Yeah, it was over a multi-year period, very many years. And some of the easier things were the outer layers and came off first. The hardest things that, you know, you're taught when you're a toddler that you don't even really realize is your belief structure are the hardest things. It gets down to the core of this imagined separate identity. And that takes...
That was the last one.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why you can't do this I am meditation, because you're not willing to let go of that personal identity. So that's why you have to do it obliquely.
Well, thank you everybody for being on the panel.
Wow, did we take up the whole time?
Yeah.